Which position should be priorities for the Panthers once free agency begins in a month and a half? Should Bryce Young be using VR? And what about a wide receiver at 8th overall? It's another edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, the part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, as you probably know, since it's Friday, every single Friday as well. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me over on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays like today throughout the entirety of the offseason, I'm right here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over there on Twitter to get those questions into me for next week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. It is yet another Friday, which means the weekly Friday mailbag is back here on the show. Your best opportunity to interact with me and the show by asking me your hard-hitting questions about the Carolina Panthers. We got 6 questions this week on the show. We're going to start off with Jackson, who's already thinking ahead to March 10th, which is the beginning of the legal negotiating period. Then on Wednesday, March 12th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the United States of America, these United States, the NFL new league year will begin and free agency will also officially begin. And all the contracts you hear about on Monday and Tuesday will become official. And the Panthers and everybody has to be salary cap compliant by that point in time. So Jackson is already looking a month and a half into the future, and he'll be here quicker than you realize. And he wants to know what the Panthers should do. Who should they target? As we've been doing this, and we'll continue to do this over the next couple of weeks once February gets started on Saturday, talking about every single position group in Carolina. We already talked about the wide receivers yesterday, talked about running backs the day before that, quarterbacks before that. Going to talk about the offensive line starting next week, get to the defense in a couple of weeks, and look at every single position group and what the Panthers should do, and look back at 2024 and talk about the biggest question among all those groups heading into free agency. But Jackson is asking about which group should be the priority once free agency begins, saying, what do you think will be the priority position group signings this offseason, like offensive guard was last year? Personally, I think cash will be splashed on safety and wide receiver, maybe on Trevon Moehrig or Chris Godwin or similar, but then taking advantage of a deep defensive line draft to add front 7 difference makers. I could see the Panthers going out there and spending a ton of money on a position group like they did last year. And Jackson brings that up. Offensive guard, the first move the Panthers made was to give Robert Hunt a 5-year, $100 million contract. And I'm trying to think, how many guys in the history of this organization have received $100 million contracts? Cam Newton, he certainly received one, and then they haven't had a quarterback since then who's been worthy. And prior to Cam, there wasn't really a quarterback market that led to contracts like that in the NFL. So I'm trying to think, like, Derek Brown's not getting that much money. Robert Hunt is. He may be the only Panther. There's got to be somebody else that I'm just not thinking of who signed a $100 or $100 million contract. Brian Burns wanted certainly to be the next one to do that. That did not happen, of course, as Panthers in the same offseason. They traded him, gave Robert Hunt this amount of money. So Robert Hunt got paid a ton. Damien Lewis got $69 million on the same day later that evening on that Monday in March, the first day of the legal negotiating period. So will the Panthers do something similar? I could see them deciding to spend big money on a defensive tackle, again, like a Javon Hargrave to come in there and help out there. Brown, I would assume, Ashawn Robinson returning. They could go out there and spend big money like I want them to do. Said it yesterday, even though I don't think they're going to do that on T. Higgins, who's going to be a free agent out of Cincinnati. Hell, Chris Godwin, maybe he's somebody that commands that kind of contract, just considering the market out there and always needing receivers. So possibly they do that. I would not be surprised if they do spend money on a starting safety, considering that Nick Scott's not going to get money to be a starting safety. He didn't even get money this past year to be a starting safety. I don't imagine that Jordan Fuller is going to get money to be a starting safety, getting Carolina and Xavier Woods possibly, but not anything significant. And even the deal he signed 3 years ago that brought him here from Minnesota wasn't like some one that broke the bank. So I could see them doing that for sure. I would think that defensive line, getting someone experienced, I would rather that than necessarily getting a D lineman in the draft. And if you're going to get one in the first round, and maybe Mason Graham from Michigan is available then. If not, possibly you trade back, get somebody like Kenneth Grant later on. There, as you mentioned, are some talented defensive linemen that can be found later on in the draft as well, in the second round, third round, and so on and so forth. I think, though, that they should be getting a veteran at safety if you're going to have Damani Richardson starting there as a second-year player. And I do think that they should add a wide receiver at the very least to raise the floor. And maybe it can make sense. We'll talk about this later on if someone did ask about potentially drafting a wide receiver as high as 8th overall coming up in the 2025 NFL draft. But I would think that defensive line, safety, not linebacker, cornerback, those would be the ones that you would want to look at as potentially the priority groups that they're looking at throwing some money at once free agency begins officially on March 12th later on this year. Kevin has a question about Bryce Young and his preparedness moving forward, saying, given the success of Jayden Daniels, do you think other teams, more importantly the Panthers, will start using VR technology to help quarterbacks prepare for games? Jayden Daniels seems years ahead in his development and game preparation and says that VR played a key role. I had to look this up because this is something maybe I have not been listening to the broadcast the last month when the Commanders were making their run to the NFC title game. I never heard anyone mention the VR that he's been using, apparently dating back to his time at LSU. Ben Standig, who's one of the reporters, the Washington Commanders, who writes for The Athletic, had a great article back on October 18th of last year about Jayden Daniels working with VR simulation. And it goes back to his time at LSU. And remember, his last year at LSU is when he won the Heisman Trophy. He had 50 total touchdowns, 3,812 yards passing, 4,946 total yards from scrimmage on the way to win the Heisman Trophy. He had not passed for 3,000 yards, more than 17 touchdowns in any of his previous 4 seasons at LSU or back when he was at Arizona State. And apparently he uses the VR at a faster speed than things actually operate in as far as like real life. He said, apparently, I've seen this before. It moved more than 20 times faster in VR. So processing speed is so important. That was one of the big reasons why Carolina went out there and drafted Bryce Young. Remember the S2 cognition test that was heavily debated as CJ Stroud apparently didn't have a high score, but then he goes out there and he was excellent as a rookie, was good again this past year. Didn't really matter as Bryce Young, who had a great S2 cognitive score, did not do that well his rookie season for more reasons other than whether his score is high enough and if that matters or not. But plenty of people talked about how Bryce Young, his processing speed, that was the big reason why Carolina wanted to take him. They felt like he was the most ready-made of the quarterbacks available then in 2023. And if this German company, which is Cognilize, I think I pronounced that right, Cognilize, they're the ones who apparently have this VR system. And it was Daniels who wanted to bring it over to the Commanders as well. And it wasn't necessarily something that Washington had. Maybe other teams in the league look at this, and if Carolina thinks that it makes sense, why not? There's also a quote here from Marcus Mariota. The organization purchased VR simulation for its quarterbacks. Mariota, the backup, finds the modern application amazing in helping quarterbacks develop comfort within an offense to recognize patterns. Quote, I believe defenses are patterns, Mariota said. Recognizing them quickly is important, and the VR seems to help Jayden with that. So Marcus Mariota felt like he gained something out of it, and I would imagine that every team is going to want to have their quarterbacks using this. And you think about a guy coming in who's learning a new offense, this can help him with install in the offseason and be able to do something like that. So I think it makes perfect sense for Bryce Young to utilize it as long as he's comfortable. Well, I don't see why he wouldn't be and wanting to improve and be the best that he can. And I think every NFL team is going to look at what Jayden Daniels did this past year and say, let's do that. Now, was that the reason why he was great this year? I don't know if it's the reason, but certainly is a part of the reasons why he was really good. Like, he's always had great arm strength, an excellent athlete. And hell, he played 6 years of college football. It's not like he is Drake May or Caleb Williams, who played 3 years and really only 2 years as full-time starters and then came to the NFL this past year. And Caleb was good, and Drake was a Pro Bowler for whatever reason. So they had success, of course, but they weren't Jaden Daniels. They weren't Bo Nix. And those two guys, again, played 5 and 6 years of college football. So I think it's not necessarily the VR being the only thing. It's also having the real experience and having that amount of starts with Bo, 3 years starter at Auburn, 2 at Oregon. Jaden, 3 years as at least a starter, 4 years at Arizona State, whatever it was. I kind of forget because he started in 2019. I distinctly remember a game against Justin Herbert's Oregon where they upset the Ducks as being his breakout performance. And go talk to my guy, Evan Smoke Ludwig over at WFNZ here in Charlotte. I told him before even that game happened that like this Daniels guy is going to be awesome. Now, I was off of it for a little bit because things were weird there in Tempe for a little bit, especially when he left, the whole locker room clean out situation. Then he got to LSU and he like turned things around. He was outstanding. Sure, if Bryce Young can be better, if any Panther player, hell, why not use it for receivers? Why not use it for all rookies in general? If that helps them be better, then yeah, I'm all about it. So we'll see how the VR technology is implemented further throughout the league heading into 2025. Let's take a quick pause and come back and answer more of your weekly Friday mailbag questions right here on Locked On Panthers. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending a concert last year. The energy and excitement were unforgettable. Now, GameTime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, GameTime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And while football season is almost over with the big game coming up here, Super Bowl 59 there in New Orleans, there's still opportunities to go get tickets to college basketball, the NBA if you want to do that, hockey if you're interested in all of that. Go over in GameTime and do that. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? Game time. Let's get back to your weekly Friday mailbag questions here on Locked On Panthers. Now over to Stone. As I said, this past week looked at the quarterbacks, the running backs, and the wide receiver position groups heading into the official new league year here in the offseason, and talking about the Panthers potentially should or could do once free agency begins, and had a conversation about the running back position and whether the Panthers should add someone via the draft or free agency, knowing that Jonathan Brooks is likely to miss a significant amount of time coming up in 2025. And I maintain, I am not a doctor. I don't know what the rehab process is going to be like for Brooks after re-tearing his right ACL. Is it easier? Is it harder to come back from a second ACL tear in that same knee? I don't know. But just going off of what happened the previous time as just president, he tore his ACL late November and did not play again until mid-November. So nearly a full calendar year. And if that's the case, we're not going to see Jonathan Brooks until almost December of next year here in Carolina. So what should the Panthers do in his absence if there is going to be an absence, which I'm imagining there will be? Stone, he asks, so with the running back situation, it's a very stacked class at that position. Are you looking in free agency for a running back and chancing that Brooks is healthy, or do the Panthers go ahead and draft another running back? I don't think they should draft one. And I brought this up before, and my guy Joe Ovius gave me a hard time about saying this. I still forget what Joe's rationale was, but go check out the OG with Joe and with Joe, Ovius and Julio. Because they do a great job. And I go up there every once in a while. I have not been up there in a while, but I'm sure we'll talk soon. But I brought up the fact that, okay, the Panthers, they took Jonathan Brooks. He was really good at Texas, but he's coming off a torn ACL. And Ian Rappaport came out there during the draft, and he was clearly getting the reporting either from the Panthers or from Jonathan Brooks' camp saying July 1, he'll be ready to go. Well, that clearly was not the case, as he was not ready to go until October, I think was when they finally opened up his window. And then it was November 12th, I believe, was that game against Kansas City where he finally was back out there actually playing. So, yeah, that was not true as far as who'll be ready to go July 1. But they took a player who they knew, and Carolina knew, they said it, they knew was not going to be an impact for them in 2024 because he's coming out the ACL, which is totally fine. They already had Chuba Hubbard. They had Miles Sanders. They didn't necessarily need him to be ready to go, but it's also taking up 1 year out of the 4 years of his rookie deal. And this is a team that claims that they really care about running backs and that they matter and that they're going to reward them financially, as we saw with Chuba Hubbard. And Dan was here when Miles Sanders got that contract. So that's all well and good, but you already had a guy who's compromised and a guy who wasn't going to be able to even be an impact because he's not going to be healthy. It's different if you drafted him and he wasn't ready to go and that Sanders was ahead of him and Chuba was ahead of him, but he wasn't ready to go because of the injury. And you look at this class coming up, Aston Jeanty almost won the Heisman Trophy. You have Amarion Hampton down the road in Chapel Hill is outstanding. 2 of the running backs in the national title winning The Ohio State University Buckeyes in Trevion Henderson and Quinshad Judkins, formerly of Ole Miss. Ollie Gordon, remember him from Oklahoma State, didn't have a great year. I don't know what happened in Stillwater with Gundy and the boys, but he's a guy to look at as well. Trevor Etienne, he's coming out kind of weird. Didn't really work out this past year at Georgia. He wasn't really healthy. Like, there are some talented backs, and looking at what Saquon did, especially what Saquon did, and what Josh Jacobs did, Aaron Jones, a lot of these name free agency backs that went out to other places, they had a lot of success, and feels like the running back's kind of back. So the Panthers are sitting here now looking at it where, yeah, they got the top back in the class last year, but would Brooks be the top back in this class? I don't know. So they could have waited, theoretically, but they didn't. They felt like this is what they needed to do, and they were focused on the team building for this year and in the future, and they felt like Jonathan Brooks was the right guy for them, and it does not guarantee that they would have been able to draft any of the aforementioned backs. Maybe that was Joe's point. I can't remember. But yeah, I think it makes the most sense because Brooks still has a chance to come back this season and has 2 more years after that. And you have Chuba under contract. You're likely getting rid of Miles Sanders, maybe. And we talked about this, I believe it was Wednesday, about the potential that it makes sense to rework that deal, keep around Miles Sanders if he's willing to do that until Brooks is ready to go. Like, I would not mind that at all. But they also could just go find a running back and pay him federal minimum wage with no overtime, no holiday pay, no bonuses, and use him, abuse him, then lose him. That's what they could do. And I think that's what they should do as far as finding a backup for Chuba and then waiting until Brooks is ready to go. And it might not be until 2026. All right. Kurt also has a question related to conversations that we had earlier this week on the show about the wide receiver position group, saying, following up on your wide receiver episode, knowing you don't see Xavier Legette being a number 1 wide receiver in the future. Let's say next season, Jalen Coker continues to blossom and Legette stays where he is and doesn't necessarily address his drop issues. If Coker ends up with better stats and a better season than Legette, is that more of an indictment on front office and scouts for having first-round grade on Legette, or more of a feather in the cap for them for finding Coker as a UDFA? Well, let's be glass half full guys, not glass half empty guys, right? And look at it as feather in the cap to Dan and the scouting department for finding Coker and for paying Coker and being able to have him be in a position where he's in and potentially could be in this scenario that you laid out there, Kurt. I think that would be great. It would be, I guess, less so with Legette. But here's the thing. Like, Legette has a 4-year contract. That could be a 5-year rookie contract. He's still cost controlled. And if he doesn't blossom, he has similar numbers to this season, this upcoming season here in 2025, you'll be disappointed. But also it depends on what else they do at the position. Did they bring in T. Higgins and he goes out there and has 1,200 yards receiving, and Coker takes that step you're talking about, and Legette is right there around 500 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns, and has the drop issues? Are you that concerned? Or is it like, okay, well, maybe he's not going to ever be that guy, but where you have that guy, and you have another dude who looks like he's pretty good. Then you have, Thielen to be departing likely after next season. I would look at it that way. It depends on what are the other factors going on, what other nuances that we don't have it, because it's a hypothetical. So hypothetically, yes, you'd be disappointed. Theoretically, maybe you wouldn't be that disappointed based off of who could also be in there. So we'll see what happens there. I think Coker, good find. Absolutely. I think Leggett is going to be a contributor here, but I still do not believe that should preclude them from wanting to upgrade the position. And if that means that Coker loses some snaps and I guess Leggett to a lesser extent, considering what you gave up. He didn't give up a lot, but it is an investment to get a guy in the first round. You don't want to take too many snaps away from him, but if you can find somebody who can help your quarterback and help the team, which Dave Canales showed you when he benched Bryce Young, it's about the team and making the team better and playing their best ball. Go out there and do it. So we'll see how it plays out this upcoming season with those two second-year players at the wide receiver spot here in Carolina. Two more questions, and a question actually about wide receiver and if the Panthers should use the 8th overall pick on one. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections. And if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where one of the starting quarterbacks only needs to throw 1 yard to win. So only 1 yard from Patrick Mahomes, 1 yard from Jalen Hurts. And I think you're going to get 1 yard from both of them. Then you win. Pair that with one more correct pick and you're cashing out. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. 2 more questions left on this weekly Friday mailbag edition of Locked on Panthers. Again, if you did not get a question in for this week, either at me or DM me over on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Julian Council, and I'll possibly get to your question next Friday here on the show. Yogan, I believe is his name. And again, if you give me a question and you have maybe this is his name, I don't know, but if your name is not actually the name that's in your bio or in your whatever, what is it? Your profile name? I don't know. Tell me what your actual name is, please. Yogan, what are your thoughts on a new mock draft suggesting the Carolina Panthers, draft Tedera McMillan out of the University of Arizona? Been looking at his film, and he looks really good. But do we really want to prioritize the offense over the defense with the 8th overall pick? Well, why can't you prioritize your quarterback over the defense with the 8th overall pick? If you put it that way, sounds a lot better, right? Opposed to saying the offense over the defense. What about Bryce Young over the defense? Wouldn't you want to make it even easier for Bryce and want to build off what Bryce did in the second half of the season, opposed to using that on the defense, which I know has a long way to go. But think about it like this. This is how they're going to think about it. They're getting Derek Brown back. Well, that's basically like getting an 8th overall pick right there. He's coming in. They're going to look at him as a free agency addition. Is he technically one? No, but that's kind of how they're going to look at this offseason. Well, we just added Derek Brown to the fold. He's probably better than anybody that's going to be taken 8th overall in that spot for Carolina defensively anyways. And I don't believe Abdul Carter is going to be available. So we'll see what happens there. I don't necessarily think it's like the craziest thing in the world. And again, I really need to know where the world is on March 31st. And that will make it easier for me to answer this question. Here on January 31st, hard for me to really know whether it would be a good or a bad idea. And I don't think it's a bad idea to take Tet McMillan. The dude was outstanding the last 2 years at Arizona. I don't know how many of y'all watch Arizona Wildcats football, but the year prior when they had Jed Fish as their head coach, that offense was phenomenal when they won, I think, 11 games that season, 10 or 11, whatever it was, before Fish bailed to go to Washington. And that's a product of Nick Saban retiring from Alabama. That Arizona lost their football coach. Imagine that. So he was good that year. Then last year, he was basically their offense. And go watch that game against Colorado, where the Heisman Trophy winner and possibly the best player in this draft, argue amongst yourselves whether he is or not, I don't really care, Travis Hunter, he was up against Tet McMillan. Go watch the tape on that. And I think you'll be pretty impressed too. I don't know if you already have or not. But yeah, he's a good player. He would be that tall, big-bodied receiver. And like we get, obviously, physically is imposing. He's not like super tall. He's like 6'1", I think. He feels more stocky compared to a guy like Ted McMillan, and he would be a nice red zone threat. Obviously, Jatavion Sanders can be that as well, and he's just an all-around receiver. I would be interested. And you tell me, because I'm talking about go out there, spend money on a proven guy like T. Higgins, but if you can get Ted McMillan and you have Thielen coming back, and you already got two guys that have shown you that they can contribute, like Coker and like Leggett. Like we're talking about Ted McMillan, Xavier Leggett, Jalen Coker in the future as a trio in Carolina with Tavion Sanders. That's pretty appealing. I don't hate it. So yeah, I don't think it's crazy if they do that, because it's not necessarily prioritizing the offense over the defense. It's prioritizing your quarterback and making sure he has enough around him to build off of that strong second half of 2024. Final question comes from Jamie, who says, do you think Ejiro Evero still being the DC could deter JC Horn from signing an extension? As JC said, he likes to travel with ones. As far as number one receivers, I feel like we lost Jeremy Chin and Frankie Louvu, who are both great players because of the scheme, didn't use them to the best of their ability. Don't want a similar outcome with Horn. Well, the difference was Horn is still under contract. They got the fifth-year option there. So he's going to be a Carolina Panthers upcoming season. I don't see the Panthers trading him away. Like, he's going to be a Panther. It would take him not getting the extension and then doing the whole thing and song and dance next year, around this time, for there to be any concern that he's want to stick around. And then what's going to happen after this season? Like, Ejiro Evero is probably not going to be the DC. And understand this too. This is JC's last year of his deal. It's Ejiro Evero's last year. These guys, I don't necessarily think, signed these contracts thinking that, oh, I'm not going to sign here because this guy is the DC. And I don't know what the pitch was for Carolina last year with Frankie Louvu and what the pitch was for Washington and Dan Quinn for Frankie Louvu. Clearly the way that Washington utilized Louvu probably better. And when you looked at what Micah Parsons did in Dallas with Dan Quinn, why wouldn't he want to be a part of that? And it's probably more similar to the things that Phil Snow did with him a couple years ago when he was the DC. So I think that Ejiro Evero, necessarily not looking at Louvu as that kind of pass rusher, and some of those things cost him staying in Carolina, even if the Panthers gave more money. And then Chin, like, he wasn't really utilized. He missed a lot of time as well. But there's other guys that I think he felt like were better scheme fits. So yeah, that's disappointing. I don't think that either one of those players is up to the caliber of JC Horn, who can potentially be an all-pro. And I think Louvu is awesome. I'm not trying to talk down about either one of them. I do not think that the situation is similar, because those guys were unrestricted free agents. They could leave. They didn't have to sign here in Carolina. And the Panthers were not going to place a franchise tag. JC Horn has fifth-year option. He's still under contract. I don't think it's going to deter him, because he can think about, okay, I'm going to play one more year with this guy as my DC, and then who knows, after this upcoming season, he may not be the DC anymore. So understand that as well, that there's only one more year guaranteed, and guaranteed is not even probably the right thing to say, because who knows? Dave Canales could pull the plug at any time if the defense continues to look bad. And if this time around he thinks it's the scheme and not the players who are the reason why they are really struggling defensively coming up here in 2025. So I do not think that Ejiro Evero sticking around is going to have an impact on whether JC Horn wants to stay in Carolina or not, because he probably is not going to be here the entirety of JC Horn's career as a Carolina Panther. All right, well, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, you all subscribe, follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, where next Friday, I'm back. Weekly Friday mailbag. I'm going to answer your questions, either at me or DM me, to get those questions into me right now. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I'll talk to you next month, which starts tomorrow, and we'll be talking about the tight ends. What should the Panthers do to elevate that position group in 2025? Talk about that here on Monday on Locked On Panthers.